All right, recording has started.
Wonderful. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful autumn evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kelly Curtin, and I'm one of the college counselors here at DePaul Prep. We know that talking about financing college can often be complicated. So it's really our hope this evening, by the time that you leave the meeting, you'll have a better understanding of topics like sticker price versus net price, or the different ways that colleges assess financial need, and how you can work with financial aid offices moving forward. And also, we actually started talking about financial aid with your seniors this afternoon in advisory, where we introduced them to the FAFSA as well as about budgeting for college. So it's our hope that this conversation will continue with you and your student in the weeks and months to come. So let's get started. But before we begin, a few housekeeping items. First, we're going to go over a lot of information tonight. So if you missed something, please don't worry. We are recording the presentation, and we will post a video to our college planning website. We'll also post the Google Slides so you can refer back to them at any time. Second, this is our first time using Google Meet. We used to use Zoom for all of our virtual programming. So using Meet for a presentation is new to our team. So if we run into any technical difficulties, we really hope you'll be patient and bear with us. And finally, we just wanted to say thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance of the presentation. We do hope to address all of the questions that you submitted throughout the evening. But if there's a question that you still have that's specific to you, your college counselor will reach out to you individually. In the meantime, for those of you who still want to submit questions, in the right-hand left corner of Google Meet, you'll notice kind of like this triangular shape. It has a triangle, a square, and a circle, and that's where you can post questions. And then Samantha Mondro, who's one of our other college counselors, will be feeding helpful links through the chat throughout the night that you can always copy and paste into your own browser. So this is the agenda for this evening. After brief introductions, we're going to go over just some important dates for you to be aware of in the months moving forward. We're going to talk about how you can identify college costs, looking at the FAFSA and some supplemental aid applications, how to work with financial aid offices, and then if we have enough time, we will address some of the questions that you submitted. So this is who we have here tonight. We are here with three members of the DePaul Prep College Counseling team. We have Kay Koschel, who is here. You will hear from her later this evening. And then we have Samantha Mondro, who is running our tech operation, making sure everything runs smoothly, as well as posting links in the chat and moderating the Q&A. You'll notice that our director of college counseling, Tony Menestra, is not here this evening, with our Notre Dame on the Road event occurring here on campus tomorrow at 7:15 p.m., followed by our open house for prospective students on Thursday night. He's sitting tonight out. However, you are going to be in really great hands because we are just thrilled to be joined with Jerry Zabrinsky, who is the Associate Vice President for Financial Aid at Lake Forest College. I had the pleasure of hearing Jerry talk about the FAFSA and financial aid 2 years ago at the Midwest College Showcase event. And he just did such a wonderful job explaining financial aid in terms that were easy to understand, that we were just really excited that he's here tonight. So Jerry, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself briefly before we move on.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly and Kate and Samantha, and thanks for everyone for joining us tonight. We have a really nice sized group. I'm looking at the number of people. So thank you all for coming to to listen to this exciting, wonderful topic of college costs and scholarships and everything in between. I've been in the profession of financial aid and admissions and student affairs for 4+ decades. I've been at Lake Forest for just almost 32 years now. I was at DePaul University for 10 years before that. You're always in this same kind of area. And honestly, I love what I do. I love sharing this information with you because ultimately making it easier for you to go through the process makes it easier for us on our end, to kind of help you figure out what's going on, what your child is eligible for. A little bit more background. I'm first generation, born and raised Chicago, grew up in the Little Village neighborhood in Chicago, if you're familiar with that. I currently live in Lincoln Park and commute up to Lake Forest and back from Lake Forest almost every day with the construction on the Kennedy. So yay for an hour and a half commute back to the city sometimes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jerry. Well, and you'll hear from him a little bit later. Okay, just to get started, here's a list of some commonly used terms when we're talking about financial aid. In the interest of time, we're not going to go over all of these terms, but just a few key phrases to be familiar with as we're talking moving forward. One, cost of attendance, also known as COA. This means the sticker price, what the university bills to you, plus any indirect costs. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Your FSA ID, which stands for Federal Student Aid Identification. You will need an FSA ID, both you and your student, in order to access the FAFSA form, as well as Student Aid Index, or SAI. For those of you who've completed the FAFSA in previous years, for other children, this was known as the EFC. So here's a key list of terms for you to reference moving forward. Okay, looking ahead, this is a timeline of kind of things to be aware of between now and May 1st. So on October 1st, the CSS profile opened. It is a financial aid assessment that some private institutions and selective public institutions use in addition to the FAFSA to determine institutional aid. We'll go over this in more detail later. So that is already open. If any of your students' colleges require this document, this is something that can be completed now. Now you can begin creating your FSA ID or your Student Gov account. We'll talk about that as well. And now is actually the time to begin thinking about scholarships. So oftentimes students kind of wait until March or April, and they come to us and they're like, Ms. Curtin, Ms. Koschel, Ms. Mondro, we want to apply for scholarships. And by that time, many deadlines have passed. So now's the time to begin looking ahead to scholarships you can apply to and seeing how you can apply to scholarships within the colleges that your students applying on. And Kate's going to talk about that a little bit later. October 15th, some of your students are finalizing their applications for some of these early application deadlines for schools in the South, like Clemson and UNC Chapel Hill. But November 1st is really the main early action or early decision deadline that most of our students are working towards, with a few colleges like CU Boulder, who have deadlines, early action deadlines of November 15th. If you have a student who is applying early decision to a college, some of them might have a deadline for submitting the CSS profile in November. So it's important to be aware of what those deadlines are. Looking ahead to December 1st, fingers crossed, the FAFSA will be open. And like I said, we're going to be diving in a little bit deeper into that later tonight. But that's what the federal government says, that it's going to be ready. So we're going to just manifest that. Some other colleges have early action deadlines. And during this month, some early action or early decision deadlines are released. Looking in January and February, regular decision deadlines. Some schools might have early financial aid offers to students. I guess it depends on the FAFSA, or some institutional scholarship deadlines are happening. And then be sure to complete any financial aid paperwork that your school needs. And then March and April, we're really hoping that's when the majority of financial aid offers come out from your colleges. Continue to complete paperwork. And then May 1st, that's the college decision deadline. That's when your student will have to indicate where they plan to enroll. And oftentimes a housing and enrollment deposit is needed. Okay, moving forward, cost of attendance. So how much does college cost? And so when you're thinking about the overall cost of attendance, you really need to look at kind of the direct costs. And those are the costs that are going to be billed directly from the university to your family. So that includes tuition and fees and room and board. So that's what they are going to bill directly to you. But however, you also have to budget for indirect costs. So these include books, supplies, transportation. The transportation costs for a student who is traveling to Wisconsin for college will look very different than a student who is traveling to the East or West Coast. So that is something that you'll have to keep in mind as you're budgeting for your students' total cost of attendance. We actually did a fun exercise during advisory today where students kind of went through and made choices that would impact how much their college would cost. So you should ask them about it. And you also have to budget for any miscellaneous expenses, family emergencies, and things like that. So I think oftentimes families are really intimidated by the sticker price or list price, and this is the price that's featured as the cost for a college. But the one thing that we want you to know is that this is kind of like the sticker price is kind of like buying a car. You know how it's very, very high, but then because of all the offers and deals, then it's kind of reloaded. It kind of goes down to a more reasonable price. That's the way that some colleges are. While the sticker price for colleges has been increasing significantly over the past decade, in some institutions, the net price has remained only a little bit higher. So the way you can figure out what your net price is going to be is you take your sticker price, which is the amount that a college posts on their website, and then you deduct whatever gift aid you receive, and that's free. That's free money, whether it's scholarships or tax benefits like the Equal Opportunity Credit, which is $2,500, and then you deduct that to get your total net price. And what are ways that you can begin identifying your potential net costs when you don't have a financial aid award letter in front of you? We don't necessarily want to wait until March or April to begin planning for that. So there are a few tools to help you estimate your costs. The first is something called a Federal Student Aid Estimator. It was previously called the FAFSA Forecaster, where you can put in some of your data, not as extensive as what you'll put in for the FAFSA, and it will indicate how much potentially federal aid you may receive. So whether that's grants or loans or work study, it can give you an estimate. What we talk about with our families is looking at net price calculators. Almost every college has a calculator within their financial aid website where you can put some of your students' academic information, so test scores or GPA, and then your financial information. And then the net price calculator will come up with it really depends on school to school, but sometimes it's what is the average financial aid package that you may receive, best case scenario or worst case scenario. And Ms. Mondro is posting links to each of these items in the chat. There's also sites like Meritmore and the Big J Educational Consulting Interactive Tool, which actually Ms. Koschel just shared with me this evening. It looks super cool, so I'm going to let her tell you more about it.
And here I go. So I'm really jazzed about scholarships, and I am the one who's in charge of our scholarship database. So we're definitely going to talk about how scholarships work in a slide or two. I see that in the Q&A. Can you apply for scholarships before you've chosen a school? So we will definitely address that. And I will show you Big J Educational Consulting Interactive Tools in a slide or two. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, this is a really amazing kind of framework to think about colleges that blows my mind because I've never thought about it before. I started working at DePaul and read Jeff Sinkel's book. He's an author and he wrote a really popular book based on his research called Who Gets In and Why, that kind of addresses who gets into Ivy League schools and what are some of the characteristics that they're looking at. So he characterizes colleges in the US, so these are our four-year schools, into two different categories. So sellers are basically the haves of the college market. So they have a high application yield, meaning the students who are applying are most likely going to go there. So they don't have to worry about whether the kids who are applying are really that serious. And they have a really low admission rate. So think below 20%. So about 10% of colleges in the US are sellers. So these are places like our Yale's. Tulane is a good example of a seller. So they have a lot of choices of students they can pick from. And typically they can actually kind of sell students off because they don't really need them as much as perhaps a buyer. So a buyer still has a great graduation rate, great return on investment, but they're going to have a medium to lower application yield rate and acceptance rate over 30%. And 30% is still quite low, but it means they have to be a little more concerned about what students are they going to pull in to fill their class. And so they're going to be giving a little more money to try to attract students. Both of these types of schools, as mentioned, can provide a good return on investment and provide your students with amazing things. So it's not like one is better than the other. You can go to the next slide. So these are some really fun charts, and we will send the slides out so you'll be able to see this, that are giving examples of buyers versus sellers. So for example, University of Michigan has an acceptance rate of 23% and a yield rate of 45%. But that little red pie chart area is what I want you to look at. So that's about 30% of students who get scholarships without thinking about financial need. So this is going to be something that applies to all families. Any family can get merit aid for their student based on their grades or test scores without need. But some colleges give way more merit money than others. So an example of that would be Pitt, where 42% of students are getting merit money without any respect to financial need. So you see some other examples of comparable colleges that have really amazing grad rates, prestigious reputations, yet some are giving more merit money than others because of the amount of students they're pulling in when it comes time to commit. You can go to the next slide. Great. And then here's another example, and I want to point out some of our Southeast friends are on here. University of North Carolina, it says 0%, I think. My eyes aren't that great, so I'm like peering at the chart. 0% for merit aid, whereas Clemson, which has 53% of students, are awarded merit aid without any regard or respect to financial need. So you can actually get Jeff Salingo's chart online. So if you go to his website, all you do is put your email in and he'll give you access to all of his tools. And then you can play around with this to really compare, okay, what schools are possibly going to give my child more merit money, but are at the same level as the school that maybe does not give that much merit money. Go to the next slide. Okay, this is another really pertinent example to our population. So thinking about out-of-state Midwest publics, we really love them. We love the spirit, but there is a difference in a couple of different things. One, you want to think about the cost of living in the United States. Kelly and I just went to Los Angeles. My, oh my, it was hard to get an Uber, food costs a lot. And then I was wondering, with students going out there, families would have to add a lot of indirect costs and consideration for their student, even just to get to the airport for $60 versus Chicago, where it might be $40. So with our out-of-state Midwest publics, Wisconsin tends to be on the very high end of cost of attendance, with University of Michigan kind of right below them, and then Michigan State, And I was kind of in the middle for cost of attendance, whereas we have places like Western Michigan, Nebraska, and University of Kansas, where in general the state is more affordable than the state of Illinois and the state of Michigan. So therefore, the cost of the school, the base price of the school, is generally just less without considering scholarships. And then because University of Kansas may not seem as glamorous, for example, even though they have great academic school spirit, maybe kids are like, oh, it's Kansas. They're going to actually be boosting up their scholarships. And I know even like Nebraska has a specific scholarship for students coming from Illinois to just draw them in. So if you have some cost thoughts and you're really wanting to find a great fit for your student, but maybe you want some more affordability, we really suggest you think beyond maybe some of the main names that come in and consider other similar options for your student where they can have the same great experience. Next slide. Oh, it didn't show up. Oh, it did show up. There we go. This is another example comparing similar types of schools. So for private liberal arts schools, Denison and Colorado College, again, are going to be a higher price point than a similar size liberal arts school with the same amazing choices for classes. And then Beloit and Knox are on there that are going to be much more affordable. And Knox even has the benefit of matching the price point of U of I. So they will reduce their private costs by a lot to match our in-state flagship. So that's another thing to think about when you're looking at affordability. Next slide. And our faves, I love the Southeast actually too. I visited UT Knoxville and I definitely see the appeal with the spirit. But a lot of times our students are missing some other friends on the SEC that could be more affordable for their family and could give them that same spirit. So we see UT Knoxville and Clemson versus the price points of Ole Miss or South Alabama, which is on the Gulf Coast. So that's a beautiful area. And they could get the quality education for much less because of where those schools are situated. Next slide. Okay. Scholarship search. We're going to go over a little bit of strategy in the next slide. We just want to let you know that we do have a scholarship database on our college website for DePaul. And this is a place where you can find several things. One, you can see a scholarship calendar in the second tab where it's very strategic and lists out some major scholarships that we see students often winning month by month. And I try to stay on top of that. But believe me, there's way more scholarships than what's on there. That's why we have the first tab, which has a bunch of scholarship search engines for you. And for those particular search engines, one of my favorites is actually Going Merry because one, it's very visually pleasing. It shows you how long the scholarship will take. So that's appealing. And also shows you how competitive a scholarship is. So for any of these websites, the student would create a profile and they would fill out the different demographic information about themselves. And then the scholarship website would start sending them relevant scholarships. I get scholarship emails every week. So I would suggest if you're going to sign up for one of these that maybe your child uses an email that's less cluttered and easier to like locate those scholarships. And I am not minimizing this. There's scholarships for everything literally out there. It could be your left-handed, in a union, a daughter of the American Revolution, Italian, Catholic, all different sorts of religious points, gender, major, liking to knit, writing, all sorts of things. So basically anything your child feels passionate about could win them a scholarship. A lot of times, as Kelly mentioned, the problem is they wait till the last minute and then it's a little bit too late because private scholarships tend to dissipate by April, May, and then it's too late to get them. Next slide. So as far as kind of approaching the scholarship search, a general strategy is the smaller, the better. Students often think that maybe $500 isn't going to make a difference, so they don't want to try for it. But what they don't realize is there's way less competition because obviously there's other students who are thinking exactly like them. Additionally, a lot of those sweepstakes scholarships, like the no essay scholarships, yes, you could possibly win that, but it's going to be so much competition that it's probably unlikely. So any place where it's like a no essay scholarship, most likely they just want you to sign up for things so they can email you. And it might not be the best use of your time. So we recommend first starting with close personal ties. So you can check your employer if you have a union, community organizations like Junior Achievement or Boy Scouts that your child is involved with, religious institutions like your synagogue, your mosque, your church, your alderman and your ward. I know North Center, from what I remember last year, does give out a scholarship to students. Sororities and fraternities maybe you were involved in. Next, you can explore the local level like the Elks, Rotary clubs, small government organizations, and city or county nonprofits. I know like the city of Chicago, for example, gives out a scholarship through the treasurer. And I believe that one's late. It's in May now. And you just have to write a one-page essay. And I believe you get $500 to $1,000. Next, you can explore the state level. So you can look at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission or the Illinois Association for College Admissions Counseling gives out a scholarship. The Illinois School Counseling Association gives out a scholarship. So there are other ones at the state level that we give out to students. And then you can explore national scholarships, but that can kind of be like your last level. So that'd be things like Amazon, McDonald's, Google, Foot Locker, and there'll be scholarships for them as well. And there's also national organizations like the NAACP. There's HSI, so Hispanic Serving Institution, specific scholarships you can look at as well. The biggest thing I would say is students feel like that it's kind of daunting, but really, once you get started, it's almost like being a scholarship robot. You just copy and paste the information from one scholarship, and then you use it for another. And a lot of the information that your student is currently using for their Common App can literally be reused for scholarships, including essays. You just sometimes have to twist things a little bit. And we're happy to help students with that. I'm more excited to help students once they really show the motivation. And then once they kind of get kickstarted, then they move along really well by reusing some of the content that they've already made. Next slide. We also had this great application organizer and scholarship tracker that we sent out to families last spring that you can utilize to track the scholarships that your child has won at individual colleges and kind of compare those pricing. I did forget to mention as well, when your student applies to college, they will also get portal access to their college, and often each individual college has additional scholarships your student can apply for, but those tend to be gone in December, November, like December, January, or February. So if you can provide an extra layer of like a little lurking with your child to say like, hey, can we look in your portal and just see, do they have a scholarship website where you can apply for additional scholarships, or have your student email their admissions rep and ask if there's additional scholarships that they can apply for. Those tend to be gone way before your student even wants to think about scholarships. That's another way that you can find some extra money for school. Next slide. Okay. One thing that didn't show up before I turn it over to Jerry, I'm going to turn it over in 1 second, is the one website with the long name, the Big Educational Consulting Tool. What you can do in there is compare different schools, and it'll show you not only the cost of attendance for each school, so I could put Michigan in there, I could put Nebraska in there and compare, but it'll also show the percentage of merit aid they give. So once we send out the slideshow, use those tools and try to start comparing how each school on your list really fares. And there's a lot of transparency out there, so you'll be able to see how much each of them costs. And now I will turn it over to Jerry. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Kate. So you've seen on the slides we've seen so far, and maybe I'm a Pollyanna or the eternal optimist or whatever you want to call it, but there are lots of financial aid dollars that are out there. And you see some of the schools that offer a lot of need-based financial aid, some that offer merit-based combination, some of neither. But when all is said and done, it is absolutely worth your time and effort to take advantage of not only the private scholarships that Kate just talked about, but the merit-based scholarships that the colleges offer to go through the process of being considered for any of the need-based financial aid out there. A combination of everything: grants, scholarships, student loans, work study. There's a couple different ways that we, on the financial aid side of the house, determine how much basically to give a family, how to make it affordable for them. There's a universal application called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Every college, every university across the country uses this to determine need-based financial aid, whether in addition to the merit-based, solely based on the student's credentials, whether the family needs more in terms of grants and student loan options and work study options. The FAFSA this year for the fall of 25 is going to open on December 1st. Fingers crossed, but the eternal optimist in me says it will, because they're actually rolling it out sooner than that with certain segments, certain students. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. I've got a slide about that. But that's what the college will expect you to complete so that they can determine eligibility for any of these additional programs that are out there. It doesn't just stop with the FAFSA, though. The FAFSA is, you'll see when you go through it, and maybe you've gone through it already, for younger kids, it's pretty cut and dry. It does not allow you to color outside the lines or stream of consciousness or anything like that. But this is a very personalized, tailor-made process that where colleges offer a whole package of financial aid options to a student, to a family. So to know what else is going on in your life that impacts eligibility, there's a common application, a common supplemental application called the CSS Financial Aid Profile that asks everything that FAFSA does and a whole lot more. Here is where you can do stream of consciousness. Here is where you can just write to your heart's content about all of the different circumstances or expenses that you have that are impacting your ability to pay for college or your cash flow. The profile opens October 1st. So it opened a few days ago, 6-7 days ago. It's used to determine not only institutional need-based financial aid, but also for the federal and state financial aid as well. If a college does not require the profile, and not all of them do, there's only going to be about 500 of them who either require the profile or strongly encourage you to fill it out. But if they don't, then the college will have its own application for financial aid, or at the very, very least, they'll have standalone forms where you can express there's going to be a loss of income, or you had healthcare expenses, or all sorts of different things. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Next slide. Kind of what's going on behind the scenes, kind of how we assess financial need. There's actually two formulas, kind of secret, kind of convoluted, that type of thing. Really, it's cut and dry for the federal formula for the most part. It's looking at a family's income, and the FAFSA is more income driven than anything else. Even though there are some asset questions that are asked for on the FAFSA, 99% of the time, the index number that the FAFSA results calculate that is used to determine eligibility is more income driven than anything else. As opposed to, well, not even as opposed to, but in addition to the CSS side, so schools using the profile, start with the FAFSA data, but then use the information that you provide to them saying, no, this index number should actually be lower for this family because of some of the other circumstances that they have. So the lower the index number, the higher your chances are for financial aid. The profile for some schools is pretty intrusive, pretty comprehensive, but there is a new profile out there that is being used, kind of adopted by many of the colleges, as opposed to the regular profile. This is called the Profile Lite, this has like a third of the questions of the traditional profile, and yet gives the college the same kind of results. So we at Lake Forest College were part of the pilot program for the Profile Lite, and pretty much every profile user can go to the Profile Lite next year. So long answer short, long story short, long short story long, is that the profile is not going to be as comprehensive as it once was, but it will still get to the heart of finding out where you're coming from to help the college determine more eligibility for financial aid. Next slide. We like to think of the CSS institutions, the profile users, as some of the top tier schools. And these are some of the schools where they have a lot of dollars to award. I mean, there are some, Williams is not on this list, but Williams College, earlier in the presentation, we talked about net price or net cost to you versus sticker price. I mean, Williams College, for example, has a sticker price of over $90,000 a year. But through the generosity of the college itself and other programs that they have, the net cost on average to families at Williams is like $15,000 a year. And that's because they use the profile to really get to know where you're coming from, whether it's BC, Boston College, University of Southern California, Northwestern, University of Chicago, Lake Forest College. These are some of the examples of the CSS profile institutions out there. Next slide. A really common question we get all the time, especially in light of the FAFSA being delayed until December 1st. The FAFSA used to open until the overhaul was done. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. The FAFSA used to open October 1st. So it was not a problem for early decision families to complete the FAFSA and to know what their financial aid offer would be before they needed to commit. But now that the FAFSA is delayed until December 1st, pretty much any college that has an early decision program will either use the CSS profile, which opens now, so you will have a financial aid offer from the college before you, or in addition to the admission decision, and before you have to really decide. If they don't use the profile, they'll have their own mechanism to provide a financial aid award letter to you early on in the process, because you don't want to make an early decision commitment, which is a binding commitment, until you know that it's actually affordable as well. Next slide. A couple different ways that colleges view families, or actually things that you may hear. There's need blind admission versus need aware admission. Need blind simply means that the student is either admissible or they're not. If they're admissible, they're admitted. And then financial aid is offered to them as much as can be offered to them, as much as they need, as much as the student has deserved based on their merit to it, as opposed to need aware, where schools look at the families and students applying and say, well, we're either running out of money or we just cannot afford to give you as much as you need. And so a lot of times I see need aware or need sensitive admission later on in the process. Early on in the process, you're pretty golden for the most part. It's late in the application process where colleges start to run out of money, quite honestly, and then they could switch from being need blind to need aware. And with the need blind schools, there's a couple different types there where they will meet full need with no student loans, which is wonderful, or they will meet full need, with student loans. There's no guarantee of the need that's met. And it all depends on, any given time. Colleges can change their approach to need blind versus need aware, which is why we see, at this time, there might be 100 schools that are need blind, 115 schools where, next year there could be 5 schools that are need blind, depending on the application pool. Next slide. So a quick overview of the FAFSA itself. When you kind of start to take a look at it, it's that universal application that collects basic identifying and demographic information from the student and the parents, and some financial data as well to calculate an index number. The index number, as again we learned earlier, is called the Student Aid Index, and that's different than the EFC, the Expected Family Contribution, that has been in place for decades, quite honestly. And in my profession, in financial aid, there are a lot of acronyms and a lot of shortcuts to language, and I apologize for that. But it's good to know some of these things in case some of my colleagues at other schools kind of lapse into their own financial aid lingo. And you'll say, oh yeah, I know what an SAI is. I went to the DePaul College Prep session about that. The FAFSA will open December 1st. It's got 2 sections. It'll ask for student information and parent information. It's going to ask about your income. And because you're filling it out now or in December, it's going to reference the income that's on file with the IRS, the most recent income, which is our 23 tax return. That's all that we have on file with them. It will bring that automatically into the FAFSA for you through a tool called the Direct Data Exchange, the DDX. Sorry, I have to do a little aside here because in financial aid, we have acronyms for everything. And the acronyms pretty much stand for the first letter of every word, except for direct data exchange. Exchange starts with an E. So why is it not called a DDE? I'll tell you why. Because at a conference I went to last year, that question was posed to the Department of Education. And their answer was, they're going to call it DDX because that just sounds stronger. That sounds like a transformer type name, DDX, as opposed to DDE, which does not roll off the tongue very well. Yeah, using the DDE, that does not work. So colleges will refer to this as the IRS DDX, Direct Data Exchange. Next slide. What a student is being considered for when they're filling out these applications are grants and student loans and work study and scholarships from all different kinds of sources. The federal government, through the use of our federal tax dollars, fund the federal Pell Grant, for example, and the federal student loans and the federal work study. Every state across the country also has an agency that administers its own state grants and state scholarships for its own residents attending schools within the borders of that state. No state dollars are ever transportable from state to state. Here in Illinois, we've got an agency called the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. They administer a grant called the MAP grant, the Monetary Award Program grant. Both the federal Pell Grant and the state's MAP grant are pretty significant grants. Some of the highest, well, the Pell Grant is exactly the same amount across the country. The state grant, the MAP grant, has a value of $8,400 at any college, any university within the state of Illinois. So if a student qualifies for that, they will qualify for over $8,000. The rule of thumb is what colleges look at is to be considered for the MAP grant at least, the SAI, the index number, has to be less than 9,000. To be considered for the federal Pell Grant, that SAI has to be less than $6,700. Work study is also included as part of the offer that the colleges will include in the financial aid award letter, financial aid announcement, called lots of different things. It's what we call self-help. Unlike the free money, the grants and scholarships, students earn it, over the course of the academic year, where they're working maybe 10 hours a week in some of the many different offices or places on campus. Or student loans, also self-help, because a student does something else to take advantage of that and pays that back, unlike the grants and the scholarships, which are free. Next slide. The FAFSA was overhauled dramatically for the 24-25 school year. And there were, I always get this word wrong. People, my friends, make fun of me. Is it ginormous or ginormous? There were ginormous changes made, to the point where it was delayed by months and months because there were lots of bugs that had to be worked through. And those bugs were not worked through until really late in the process. I'll tell you, we at the college, at any college, we were not able to download FAFSA results until the spring, until February and March, even though it had opened in December 31st. When it worked really, really well. And I helped so many of our families through it. And we had no issues at all. When it didn't work, it didn't work. It was dead in the water. But some of the changes that were done were the number of questions on it were reduced dramatically. That EFC, the expected family contribution, was now called the Student Aid Index. And it will still ask you for how many kids you'll have in college at any given time. And even though the federal formula won't initially take that into consideration, colleges can and will take that into consideration, not only for their own dollars, but they can take that into account for the federal and state dollars as well. Some of the other items that happened was, especially with the direct data exchange, parents, you need to provide consent to use that with the FAFSA. There will be a screen that pops up right away that says, do you provide consent that allows the IRS to automatically populate the FAFSA with your tax information, your income information? If you do not provide consent, you're done. I mean, the FAFSA is not processed. It was not sent to schools. Schools are not considering the student-friendly need-based financial aid. State, the federal, nothing happens. So please, you need to provide consent as part of the security with that. everything is being hacked these days. And, knock wood, never in the decades that the FAFSA has been around has there ever been a data breach or identity theft or anything like that. And that's because there's several different layers of security. One of them being that even if you, and when you do use the direct data exchange, you don't see the answers to the income. So if someone were to try to do that in your behalf, it wouldn't do them any good. I mean, they just wouldn't see anything. The other big changes are that the students only see their information, and parents, you only see your information. So even within the family, there's no sharing of information that's readily available. Next slide. So parents, we've changed what you're called on the FAFSA. No, you're still a parent, but the definition will say you're also a contributor because you're contributing your information to the FAFSA. Again, because the FAFSA is a universal application, a contributor can either be a parent or it can be a spouse, for an adult student who's going back to school. This is a one-size-fits-all application. But the definition of parent on the FAFSA is if parents are married, then both parents' information is provided on the FAFSA. If parents are divorced or separated, then the rule of thumb is the parent that the student lives with the most or has lived with the most over the last 12 months is considered the parent of record on the FAFSA. If that parent has remarried, then the step-parent's information is required on the FAFSA as well. If the time between a divorce household is student spends the exact same amount of time between the two households, then the parent that has the higher income is considered the parent of record on the FAFSA. But when you think about it, there are 365 days in the year. So unless a student is leaving one household at 11:59 p.m. and getting at the next one at 12:01 a.m., there's really no practical way that they're living the exact amount of time between the two households. So then that becomes your call. The other bullet point on here is that if the parent is married or remarried, then yes, the step-parent's information is required on this. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit more, but next slide. Or next slide. Here we go. There's actually some really good, and this was one of the nice benefits of the overhaul of the FAFSA. There's some pretty nice kind of 2-minute videos that you will see parents, that the students will also see when they log into the FAFSA, that pretty much tells you why you're filling out a FAFSA, what you're going to put on it, what happens next, and who is a contributor. So this will help you. There's a tool, they call it the Wizard, that will help identify who the parent of record is on the FAFSA. Next slide. To gain access to the FAFSA, to be able to log into the FAFSA, you need a username and password. It's what we also have been calling the FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. A student needs one and a parent needs a separate one. If parents are married, then only one parent needs one to access the FAFSA because you'll do all the data entry. You'll put all the information in there. The rule of thumb is to create them now because they are set to your personal information. So it's going to take 72 hours or so for you to be able to use your username or password, both the student and the parent. And so creating one tonight, if you're excited and want to do something before December 1, I can just feel it through my screen. Do it. I mean, you can go to this website, and we've got it again on another slide, but go in and plug in your information to create a username and password for the FAFSA. Again, student needs a separate one and parent needs a separate one as well. Next slide. Again, as I talked about, if you go to studentaid.gov, that's where you'll see lots of different links. One of the links will be for the FAFSA username, FSA ID, studentaid.gov account. It's being called a lot of different things. Because you'll put in your name, address, social security number, date of birth, cell phone number. This is where, like on everything now, at least at Lake Forest College, I carry my phone with me because if I need to even get on my email on my phone, I go through this two-factor authentication. I think we do that with a lot of our websites. So you'll plug something in and then it will send you that 6-digit code that you'll need to have handy, so that if you want to make any changes or even just to create one, you'll need to have your cell phone number handy. And the rule of thumb for students is to use your personal email account, not the high school's email account, because this is your username and password for life. And so you want to be able to use it in subsequent years. Next slide. A couple materials to gather, just things to have handy. First of all, the federal student aid programs has their own YouTube channel, and they've got a video, like 2-minute video, how to create your FSA ID. Something worth looking at having your social security numbers handy, making sure the information that you put in these usernames and passwords are exactly correct. And I say that because sometimes there are numbers that are transposed, or a common error that we saw last year was, when you auto-populate some of the fields in there, don't. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, because that can kind of screw things up a little bit as well. And then because the FAFSA is more income driven than anything else, it will still ask for asset information. And so just having a ballpark idea as to what kinds of assets, and I think we have a slide on that as well. So I'm just going to stop chatting there and go to the next slide. Completed as soon after December 1st as you possibly can. Again, it'll require the 23 income information, but that's not necessarily what the college will use, especially if your 24 income or projected 25 income is going to be less. Colleges have that opportunity to use the lowest of the income. It's roles based, meaning that the student fills in their section, the parent fills in their section as well. The rule of thumb, there's last 2 bullet points to tell you if the student starts first or the parent starts first. The rule of thumb is student starts first. That makes for the most complete and successful FAFSA completion. Student starts and finishes their section. Parents, then you log in and do your section, finish it, and then the application is complete. Next slide. A real quick overview of what's going to be asked for in the student section: identity and contact information. So the student's name, social security number, date of birth, cell phone number, email address. When the student starts to fill out, and parents, you too, when you start to fill out the FAFSA, in the information part, the only editable fields will be your cell phone number and your email. So if you see that and you're like, oh, I want to use a different email address, or I want to use a family email address, so all this information goes to one place, you'll have the opportunity to do that in that section. Students then, if they had income in 23, then they will bring that information in using the direct data exchange as well. They'll list their college plans. Students can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA now. It's one of those small victories, something we've been lobbying for in financial aid forever, because it used to be limited to 10. But now students can list up to 20 colleges at the same time. And simultaneously, those colleges will receive the information from the FAFSA. It's very important to know that every college, every campus has a unique FAFSA code, a 6-digit code. Especially important for large systems like Wisconsin. Madison has a different FAFSA code than Whitewater, than La Crosse, than Milwaukee. At Lake Forest College, for an example, our FAFSA code is 001706. Just in case you wanted to jot that down, I'm just saying. But that would be an example of a FAFSA code where if you were to put that in there, we would get notified that a FAFSA was completed by a family and we were listed on there, and we would draw down the information. And then the student reviews it and then signs it electronically. Next slide. Same thing pretty much for the parent information, very similar identity and contact information as well. Your financial information, again, using the direct data exchange, you really do not have any choice with that. If you filed a tax return in 23, at the page that says, do you provide consent? You really should answer, yes, I provide consent, because then it makes it really easy to bring all that information in. It'll ask you to reiterate or clarify, the marital status and household size. And kind of as an aside with that, what's happening in the FAFSA is that It's looking at the number of tax exemptions that you have and assuming that that's your household size, which may or may not be the case. But you do have the option here at this point to say, there are 4 people in the family, or there are 5 people, or yeah, I have 4 tax exemptions, but there's another person living in the household now. And so you'll be able to update that information in that section. Putting your state of legal residence, again, because I mentioned the FAFSA is used by everyone across the country, listing Illinois then triggers the state of Illinois, ISAC, to consider the student for the MAP grant. And then parents, you too will review it and you'll sign it electronically using your username and password that you use to log in. Next slide. Some of the frequently asked questions that we get. Again, I mentioned this is more income driven than anything else, but assets are still included on the application. The assets that are included are really just what we kind of consider cash on hand, money that you have access to, whether you have it in savings or stocks or equity on other real estate, or if you own a farm, well, maybe not here in Chicago, but, or a business, if you own a business, what the value of that might be, or if you have an education savings plan for the student who's applying for financial aid, also called a 529 plan, then the value of those things are still included on the FAFSA. But again, the rule of thumb is unless those items total $250,000 or more, they get filtered and diluted so much in the process that they really have no impact in calculating that index number or on the eligibility. What are totally excluded from the FAFSA are anything to do with home equity, anything to do with retirement accounts, or 529 plans that you may have for other kids, for young kids or even older kids who are already in college. Nothing to do with life insurance policies or annuities or anything like that. You are filling out one FAFSA per student because it's student specific. So the parent information obviously will be exactly the same on both, but it's the student information that is specific to that particular FAFSA. Next slide. When the student section is complete, when they've signed it and they get this page, the student section is complete, but the heading there, you're almost there, almost being the key word. You're halfway done. So you must wait until you get, and we'll see this in a couple slides, the parent confirmation page that says the student section, the whole FAFSA is now complete. Next slide. Next slide. So here is the confirmation page you get when the entire FAFSA is totally complete. That congratulations word really is congratulations. And I've never, ever seen a FAFSA not be sent to the colleges when we get to this part. It typically can take the colleges 48 to 72 hours to draw down this information electronically, but most every college will automatically in their communication flow tell you, hey, thanks for sending the FAFSA to us. Here's our next step. Here's what's going to happen after this. Next slide. Couple FAFSA completion tips, and this will make it very seamless for you, and you'll be very happy if you follow these rules. You create your FSA IDs now, before December 1st, one for the student, one for the parent. Fill out the student section first. Get the student to log in with all their information, get to that page that says you're almost there. Parent, you will receive an email invitation to complete your section of it saying, hey, you were invited as a contributor to your child's FAFSA. Click on the link in that email address, in the email invitation that you get, because that will take you to the correct kind of launch or landing page where you will plug in your username and password. And then you'll get your congratulations confirmation page, and that's when you know that it's totally done. Now, hot off the press, within the last few days, a couple other successful tips. Kelly, I think you'll need to, one, use Google Chrome as your browser. Do not use any other browser out there. Google Chrome has, honestly, I think 100% success rate. We've used Firefox, do not use Explorer. We've used, do not use any of the Apple, I think it's Safari. If there's anything at all that you can use Google Chrome. Don't use a tablet because that will not display well. That'll have some interaction issues. Use your desktop, use your laptop. That will provide the most consistent experience. And then finally, do not use autocomplete to fill in any of the sections on there. What happens in a lot of the autocompletes, like I think, Kelly, yeah. So what happens with a lot of autocomplete, I don't know if you notice this when you use it on whatever website you're working on, but it almost always will add a space at the end of your email address or your username or your password. So don't use autocomplete, or if you do, pay attention to any added spaces on there. That will absolutely mess everything up. I can't tell you the number of FAFSAs that we've had to delete completely and start from scratch because something wasn't right and it would turn out to be an extra space in there. Next slide. Throughout this process, you'll see the FAFSA is really cut and dry. It does not allow you to color outside the line, stream of consciousness, as I mentioned earlier, but special circumstances really, truly matter in this process. We really want to personalize this process for you and get to know everything that's going on in your life, not because we're nosy or intrusive, but really some of your expenses can really make a difference with lowering that index number. Next slide will show us we'll go to the next slide. Yeah, all the different kind of categories, all the circumstances, what are called special circumstances on the financial aid side of the house that we can take into account, whether there's a loss of income, whether you're paying private school tuition or a change in marital status, or all sorts of things that absolutely every college, quite honestly, must consider if you present to them, whether through the use of the CSS profile or their own application or their standalone forms. They will absolutely recognize that and take that into consideration, which then ultimately will increase the eligibility for the student and for the family. Next slide. I think that's my last one for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Jerry. You can take a breather for a few slides. I appreciate just the comprehensive overview that you just gave our families in the step-by-step instructions. So just moving on and talking a little bit about, determining financial fit for your family. But before we begin, one of the questions that we've been receiving from families is, I don't think I qualify for federal aid. I think my income is too much. Why should I even bother completing the FAFSA? And the reason is that many schools want that FAFSA information in order to even consider you for merit-based scholarships. I actually had a student 2 years ago who was admitted to some schools in California, and she didn't get a financial aid offer letter. And then we kind of dug a little bit deeper, and it's because they the completion. In fact, just before the presentation, I went to San Diego State's website, and they encourage families from backgrounds of all different kind of incomes, so they can determine any federal, state loans as well, or state aid, as well as some scholarships. So please consider doing the FAFSA. Also, for our middle income families, there are a number of schools like Notre Dame, like Northwestern, who are trying to create financial pathways for middle income families. And so they need that information in order for them to create a financial aid offer for you. So going back to financial fit, when we're talking to our students about making their college choice, oftentimes they're thinking about what's the best academic match for them, what's the best fit, whether it's size, location, major, but then also what's the best financial fit for your family. And the way that you can determine that is through comparing all of your different financial aid offers. So, for families whose incomes might be below, $75,000, they're typically eligible for the full Pell Grant, which is money that you don't have to pay back, as well as the Illinois MAP grant within the state of Illinois. It also means that some colleges like Knox or Illinois have special agreements where if you make less than that amount, then they do cover a significant portion of the cost of attendance. And the other thing that families with below this income can do, especially if your student is high achieving, is can look for colleges that will meet your full financial need. So that way they're gonna, even though the sticker price may be very high, for students who have come from lower income backgrounds, they do cover the cost. For families who are in that middle income range, now's the, once you get that financial aid offer, compare your merit scholarship offers between schools. As Jerry mentioned, if your circumstances have changed since 2023, reach out to each college. There are forms. Each college typically has a special circumstances form that you will have to complete. Now, that can be really tedious if you have to do that for each school, but think how much money that could potentially save you in the long run. So it's definitely worth going through that extra step, and you can find them. They're often clearly labeled within the college's website. And then for families whose incomes might be significantly higher, we encourage you to compare your merit scholarship offers, and the same thing, appeal those, appeal the offers if your circumstances have changed. And you can begin completing that special circumstances paperwork, after the FAFSA opens. They'll typically update the forms for the prior year. So these are questions to ask when you are evaluating offers. The first one, what is the return on investment? Oftentimes students ask me, is it a good college? And so some of the things that I tell them to look at are, what is the college's retention rate? What that means is what percentage of their students are going on to complete their sophomore year. What is the graduation rate? What percentage of students are graduating within 4 years, within 6 years? What's their placement rates? Like, what percentage are going on to medical school? What are going into grad school? What are getting jobs within 6 months of graduation? Those are the things that can help you determine whether or not the price of that college is worth the investment. The other thing you have to look very closely at is of your financial aid offer, what percentage is free money and grants compared to how much are loans. Another thing that you need to make sure that you're aware of are the scholarships that you're receiving from the college renewable for 4 years? Is it something that you will get every year? One of the things, and we'll talk about this later in the spring, is that unfortunately no financial aid award letter is the same. And so sometimes it can be hard to decipher how much scholarship money that you're often getting. So it's very important to make sure that you know whether or not that $10,000 that you're getting for freshman year is something that will continue automatically. And then finally, are there additional scholarship opportunities? As Kate mentioned earlier, once you have access to that college portal, please start exploring. Wisconsin has the Wisconsin Scholarship Hub, otherwise known as WISH, and other colleges follow suit. In fact, in that scholarship, our DePaul Prep Scholarship Database, there is a tab that lists colleges, and next to it has a direct link where you can click on to go to their scholarship portal. My cursor has disappeared. There it is. And then other ways to save. Sometimes some colleges will offer scholarships to those who are in the top 20% of their incoming class. One thing that we talk to families about is that, apply to an honors college at one of the state schools that you're applying to, because oftentimes there are benefits, whether that includes research opportunities or early course registration, but sometimes even additional scholarship money. So that's something to look into as well. Some schools have scholarships if you come to campus to visit on a certain weekend or even at all. Some have scholarships for early FAFSA completion. We've talked about appealing financial aid awards. And then, as Kate mentioned earlier, with buyers and sellers, there's those colleges that have a lower base price, have a tendency to maybe potentially offer more financial aid money or more merit money. And then finally, one of the things, let's say January rolls around and your student's GPA has improved, or you took test score, you have new scores. Don't be afraid to reach out to the admissions counselor for that college to say, hey, like my academic profile has changed. Would I qualify for any additional merit aid? And then I'm going to turn it over to Jerry for 2 more slides about how families can work together with financial aid offices.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, just a couple more slides where just to give you a sense of what's going on behind the scenes, on our end of the house is this. We truly look at this as a partnership, and we look at students and parents we expect and hope that you'll do absolutely everything that you possibly can, but really to the extent that you're able to. Yes, there's a difference between willingness to pay and ability to pay. And so we'll do what we can based on the rules and regulations and the formulas that we must use, but also the special circumstances that you provide to us to uncover as many options as we possibly can. We're not making judgment calls. We're not trying to perform a cash flow analysis for you, but we're really trying to figure out for both of us what's affordable for both of us, what we think you can afford, and how much we can offer you to make that as affordable as possible. I can't stress enough the special circumstances. If you've got anything going on in your life that you think may impact this process, please let us know. And communication is vital through this whole flow, where a good question to ask colleges: how will you specifically as a parent be kept in the loop? And I tell you that because some colleges are very conservative when it comes to FERPA privacy, and so they will only communicate with the student, and they'll communicate by email, where the majority of colleges will automatically loop the parent in on every communication that goes out of their office, whether it's from admissions or financial aid. I had a conversation with one of our families a while ago where that question came up. The parents wanted to know how they would be kept in the loop, and I said, at Lake Forest, we automatically carbon copy the parent on every communication that comes out of our office. And the student was like, carbon copy, what? They're like, oh, right, yeah. So that's CC colon. Many colleges will do that, but really, truly, we are your advocate. We want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do when you need to do it, so that we can give you as much as we possibly can. Because if your child is admissible, we want them to enroll. And to enroll, we want to make it as affordable as possible. On the next slide, we've kind of moved away from, deadlines truly are essential, vital, all the synonyms that I can use, not only for admission purposes, but for financial aid purposes and outside, scholarship purposes as well. So Kate talked earlier about the scholarship tracker. I'm a very visual person, and I love that. I love having some kind of mechanism, for me, out of sight, out of mind. Creating a scholarship tracker or a financial aid tracker where not only you see the school, what their deadlines are, when you submitted everything, but maybe also add a column in there for contact person. Yep, talk to Jerry at Lake Forest College. He said everything is in. We'll hear within the next few weeks or so. The other rule of thumb when I talk to parents is looking at all of the deadlines. Look at who's got the earliest deadline. Do everything for all the colleges by that earliest deadline. That way you're not working on one college 1 week, another college the next week. So looking at all of this and paying attention to all of the, not only the priority deadlines, but some of the drop dead dates out there as well. And if a college says you need to get your information in by February 1st, you need to do that. They say that because they can, quite honestly. We saw earlier that there are some colleges, the ones who are, really highly competitive. More students want them than they want. So next slide. Oh, and yeah, so the deadlines for everything. Kelly, back to you.
Thanks, Jerry. And
I feel like a newscast. Kelly, back to you now.
Then we'll turn to Kate for the weather, for the forecast for the week.
I love it.
And just to build off of what Jerry was saying about deadlines, oftentimes parents are asking us, like, how can we support our students? I think the one thing that you can really, really do is help keep your student keep track of their username and passwords for the admissions portals that every college is going to give you. Once you apply, the student is going to get access to a portal. And then once they're admitted, then they're going to get access to the university portal. It varies from school to school where financial aid information is posted. Your students are going to get a lot of emails from colleges who are trying to yield them. And so if you can like help your student stay on top of the emails that they're getting and the communication that they're getting from each specific school where they apply, I don't want them to miss out on specific scholarships that are available to them or deadlines that Jerry mentioned. So that's one way that you could partner with us and your student, while we want them to drive this process and have autonomy. At the same time, we don't want them to miss anything important. Okay, before we address a few of the questions that were posted in our Q&A, what additional support can you expect from DePaul Prep? I believe Ms. Koschel, who is our scholarship guru, is going to do a short pre-recorded video where she kind of walks you a little bit more in depth on how to search for scholarships, and we'll not only share that via Maya, but we'll also post on our website as well. In addition, in January 2025, we are going to have a FAFSA completion workshop where you'll get hands-on support from members of the Illinois Student Assistant Commission, also known as ISAC, including Conrad Pross, who is our ISAC rep. We debated holding the workshop in December, but just figured that we wanted to see what the rollout was like. So Conrad's going to give us some dates after October 17th, and we'll be able to communicate out our finalized date in January soon. And we'll give you help on completing the FAFSA. And also, most importantly, if you have any specific questions at all, please reach out to your college counselor. One of the wonderful things that I love about working in this office is that if I don't know an answer to a question, I have 3 other colleagues who I can turn to. So if you have a unique financial situation, email me, email Mr. Menestra, email Samantha, email Kate, and we'll be able to address your concerns. Okay, so now I am gonna, Kate and Samantha, what sorts of questions? We have about 5 to 10 minutes left. Thank you for everyone who's still with us. We still have quite the crowd, which is amazing. So let's turn it over to the Q&A.
All right. So I see a couple like FAFSA themed ones that I want to kick out, and we did answer the one about financial aid. Do schools require us to apply for FAFSA and CSS? So just again, encouraging people to apply and how to do it. And what is required. Each of those websites, FAFSA and CSS, have a ton of resources to show you exactly what you need to provide, including videos. So you can rely on those. However, we are available to help as well. So you can make a one-on-one appointment, most likely after November 1st would be nice. So we're really busy right now with students, but we would love to assist you with that if you're kind of stumped as well. If you already have a student who went to college, or you yourself went to college, this is a fun one. I also have an FSA ID, and I went to college a long time ago, but I had to transfer it over because I pay student loans. Well, I don't anymore. Thank God they're forgiven. But if you already have a child who's in college, you're going to use the same ID for yourself for that other child, and your other child will just need their own unique FSA ID. And then Jerry, would you like to answer that question? There's a question about if we don't claim our child as a dependent on our tax returns, do parents still need to put information on the FAFSA?
Yes, because it's not based on tax exemptions. Truly, a student is dependent if they are under 24 years of age. They're only independent if they're married or have kids of their own or a graduate student. So yeah, for all practical purposes, it doesn't matter whether they're claimed as an exemption by anyone. If they're under 24, parent information is required.
Awesome. Yeah, I know it seems like at 18 they should be independent,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they are
yeah.
not. Also, quick tip, they're still on your health insurance. So if a college tries to charge you for health insurance, you can waive it if they're still on your health insurance. So that'll save you a couple $1,000s too. So keep an eye out for those. I have another one that would be a very Jerry question. I've heard, I feel like I'm on a talk show. I've heard that when comparing offers, you should negotiate with the college, leveraging the offers you've received. What's the best way to do this? And do college really negotiate?
That is a good question. And I'll tell you what, I go to flea markets more than I ever have before in my life, where you learn how to bargain. I just went to the Elkhorn flea market up in Wisconsin last weekend, and you walk past a vendor like, would you take $20 for this that has a price tag of 30? So college is not like flea markets. I mean, it's different than a flea market, but as educated consumers, absolutely, you know what? It doesn't hurt to ask, but be prepared for no. Be prepared for a college to say, we've given you the best that we can. On the flip side of that, depending on how the class size is shaping up at any college, that could free up dollars later in the process. If it's getting close to May 1 and the class is not building the way the college did, well, they will have more dollars to give out. So it's not necessarily a family negotiating for more dollars, but asking for more, for a couple different kinds of reasons. The word negotiate, I would never use that word with colleges. But I'll tell you what, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Fantastic. And I know our lovely Samantha Mondro has put in the chat, it's like our Vanna White. If you have a hand raised, could you please drop your question in the Q&A? If it's something very personal too, I know finances can be finicky, so we can definitely answer some of those one-on-one questions at a different time, so we don't have to throw your business out there. Let's see, there was like another one. Oh, there was one about, does financial aid in general, that terminology, mean reduced tuition? What do you say, Jerry?
Yes. Yeah. So really, financial aid has a dollar amount attached to it, which ultimately is a discount on the cost of attendance, as we talked about. So yes, to make a short answer short, yes.
I think the biggest thing to be particular about is self-help versus grants and scholarships. So just understanding that for some students, they will only be offered self-help from a college. So they might only be offered loans or work study, whereas other colleges, as you've seen from some of those slides, are going to provide a lot more merit aid. And then to Marianne's question, is there a database of grants? Not really. There's like so many scholarship databases out there. There's scholarships.com, FastWeb, which is not one of my favorites. It's kind of messy. Going Merry, there's literally, I think like 10 plus scholarship databases. And the funny part is it's not all the same scholarships are housed in the same website. So that makes it sort of like the Wild West of scholarships. But in a way that can be beneficial. So if you or your child, because I think in the scholarship process, parents actually should kind of provide a little oversight and auspice because you're being financially affected as well as your child. It's definitely okay to sign up for several scholarship websites and use this amazing scholarship tracker that we're talking about. So if you can't find your scholarship tracker, it was emailed to you by your college counselor last year. And you would just look for, is it last name, first name, Kelly, and then your students? What is it, Kelly? Tell me.
Just look for, it's a Google sheet. It was sent in December or January, and just look for college application organizer with your student's last name. So it's a Google sheet and it should be in there. And there's 4 tabs, including one that has a list where you can add username and passwords if you want a place to keep track.
And I will say I saw, or like actually all of us have seen parents use it to its full capabilities, and it's actually pretty fun to see on our side. So if you can't find it, and you're like literally, Kate and Kelly, I don't know where this thing is, email your college counselor and we will send it to you again. We have access to it. But for those who used it fully, it was really easy for them to see kind of like what offers they were comparing, how much schools were giving them, and really make some informed decisions, because you're going to get all these portals and all these papers. So it's nice having some kind of central location to be able to view those. Oh yes, look at those claps.
I love it.
Let me see if there's anything else. And both for the people who have hands raised, is it if you go to like the little triangle square circle-y circle, is it possible you can put your question in there? Or we know who you are because you have your hand raised, so we can always reach out to you individually. Is there a rule of thumb to aim for cost of household, cost of attendance? Each individual family, I think this is really hard because I know it's hard for families to discuss finances with their child. You don't want to have all your business put out there, but I think it is important to have some kind of a bracket of like what you're willing to pay. So last year, past couple of years, I've had families say like, oh, I can do 20,000 out of pocket. So that's going to be a different type of school than someone who says like, oh, I can do maybe like 50,000, or I have a 529 in there and I can do 10,000. So if you don't feel comfortable talking about that with your child, talk to us and we can give you some general ideas, but that net price calculator is going to give you your individual family's financials consideration, and it's going to give you an idea of really what it's going to cost for your family versus my family. So using net price calculators on the colleges your child is interested in is going to be the best way for you to get an idea of what a college could actually cost you, because we don't have all that information as your college counselor.
And Kate, just to add one more thing, and it's something that I mentioned to my students in advisory this afternoon. And while it might be a tricky conversation to have, it's actually better to have it now than in April or May when a student might have their heart set on a particular college, but it's just not a viable option financially for you and your family. So just something to consider talking about now as opposed to pushing it off.
Anybody else? Maybe we could let everybody go and answer the Chambers family question after everybody goes, if they can't put it in the chat. That could
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Jerry, for just spending so much time with us and our families this evening. We truly appreciate it. I feel like even I learned so much about the FAFSA and the completion and different tips. And I just want to say how much we are grateful for you spending the time with us. I also want to thank Kate for presenting and Samantha for making sure there were no technical difficulties, and also for all of our awesome families for taking time out of their evening with us. And just know that if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your college counselor, and we're here for you. So have a wonderful night, and hopefully you feel a little bit better about what you need to do moving forward. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Good luck with everything. Good night.
Miss Mondro, can you press stop on the recording?
Yep.
Or I can actually.